You know that voice in your head that's always auditioning for most judgmental narrator in a Lifetime movie? The one that says things like, "You're behind. You're not ready. Why would anyone care what you have to say?" Yeah, that's not you. That's your brain doing what it was designed to do, but maybe doing it a little too well. Today, we're talking about the neuroscience of this part of your brain, commonly known as the inner critic. What's actually happening in your brain when that voice takes over, and how you can rewire it so you can stop living as the background character in your own story. By the end of the episode, you'll understand why your brain even has an inner critic, how to identify when it's taking control, and the practical science-backed ways to quiet it and reclaim your power. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're talking all about the inner critic. In order to do that, we really have to start with the neuroscience. But don't worry, we're not getting too deep in the weeds. We are keeping this actionable and practical. But it is extremely helpful to understand what's going on in our brains when the inner critic is activated. I'm going to be referencing highly from this book today. It's called Mind Magic, The Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything by James Doty. I am referencing this book to speak to the neuroscience of things because I am not a neuroscientist. I do have an MA in school counseling. I've learned a lot about psychology, informal education, and then in my own education about, myself and my own interests. But I want you to know that I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. This is something I've learned about on my own. And I think this book does a great job of keeping it simple, explainable, but also going deep enough to really make it useful for you. So let's talk about the inner critic and where it comes from. According to Dr. Doty, who wrote the book, the inner critic comes from the oldest part of the brain, which is the sympathetic nervous system, or the SNS. The SNS lives mostly in the brainstem, and it has one job, and that job is to keep you alive. Millions of years ago, this is the system that helped our ancestors stay alive when we were roaming the plains and hunter-gatherers. And it did so by helping us stay alert to danger. So when you heard a rustle in the grass, your SNS kicked in. And we know the SNS as the 4Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These are the mechanisms that your SNS has to keep you alive. But there's a twist. Evolution doesn't throw things away. It adds. So that same system still runs in us today. But instead of protecting us from predators, it's trying to protect our sense of self. That's why your inner critic sounds like it's fighting for your life and feels that way too, when really you're just trying to post on Instagram or ask for a raise. Your body can't tell the difference between an emotional threat and a physical threat. You could think of it like this, and this is how Doty explains it in the book. Negativity was humanity's first language. It's our brain's default setting because from an evolutionary perspective, focusing on what could go wrong is what kept us alive. But in the modern world, that same negativity bias becomes what he calls a chronic maladaptation. It keeps the inner critic's volume on high, convinced that rejection will equal death. I'm sure you can think of examples in your own life where this has been the case. Maybe you felt a wave of shame after making a mistake. That's because your SNS reads shame in the same way it would interpret a tiger attack. It launches the same fight response, but instead of defending your body, you start defending yourself. I think you could call the inner critic your survival system in modern drag. It's the same wiring, but there's different threats. So let's shift gears and talk about the Salience network, the amygdala, and our attention. Inside your brain is something called the Salience network, which constantly filters sensory information, what's going on externally, and deciding what's important. It works like a filter. The amygdala is the emotional alarm bell, and it's a big part of that system. When you approach something that feels risky, like starting a business, setting a boundary, saying, "I love you," your amygdala evaluates the emotional weight of that moment. And the more fear you bring to that moment, the more the amygdala flags it as dangerous. This reroutes your brain's attention to survival mode. And guess what? Anytime those experiences or experiences that your brain perceives as similar to those come up, that same fight, flight, freeze, essentially fear response is going to come up. Doty says this is why the inner critic can feel so loud, because it's not just emotional, it's neurological. It's how you are wired. And the more energy you give fear, the more your salience network will highlight that fear. Fear literally hijacks your focus on a physiological level. The real problem with the inner critic is not how it makes you feel, it's the fact that it distracts you from what you really want. It drains the energy that should be fueling your goals and redirects it toward imagined dangers. So you're not lazy and you're not broken, but your attention is being misallocated by your inner critic and ultimately by fear. Because in case it's not clear, the thing that's fueling your inner critic is fear. It may not look and sound and feel like fear as we imagine it. It's not about haunted houses and ghosts. It's about the things that you've perceived are a threat to your survival. And in our modern world, that means survival of the ego. Anytime you feel a threat to your sense of identity, your sense of self, which is ultimately the ego, your inner critic is going to pop right up and try to defend. It is a useful system for keeping you alive. It's not very useful for taking risks and personal growth and getting out of your comfort zone. Because what it's doing is overflagging every potential risk like spam mail marked urgent. So this all begs the question, how does our inner critic develop? Where do these fears come from and how do we learn what we should be quote unquote scared of? Well, Doty compares our early experiences to sticky notes we plaster on the walls of our minds. And I love this image for how clear it makes what the inner critic is doing. Each negative moment, so each criticism, each rejection, puts a note on the window that says something like, I'm not good enough, I'm too much, I'm not smart enough, whatever it is you've internalized. And these memories stick because the SNS, the sympathetic nervous system, overvalues negative stimuli. It's always scanning for what might hurt us. And over time, those sticky notes will layer into habit patterns. The inner critic becomes a running commentary, and we eventually mistake that for our personality, for our sense of self and who we are. But it's not who we are. It's learned conditioning. It's survival messaging that's been calcified into a false identity, and it's not who you are, and you can change it. Imagine every time you believe one of those thoughts, you add a brick to your own prison wall. And the more you believe them, the taller the walls get and the darker it feels inside. And you really start to believe these things are true. But the key is your mind built the prison, which means your mind can also tear it down. So how do we use what we know about the brain to combat what the inner critic does to us? It all starts with awareness. You have to separate the voice from the self. And to do that, you have to recognize when your SNS, your sympathetic nervous system, is turned on. Notice when you are in a reactive mode, when you're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And you can do this by tuning into your body. Notice the feeling in your body. Do you feel urgent? Do you feel filled with shame? Do you feel like you want to hide? Do you feel just overall not good? Your inner critic might be turned on. And also notice the tone of your inner monologue. Is it urgent? Is it harsh? Is it filled with shame? What you're going to do when you notice this, and by the way, noticing is a huge step because this all happens pretty subconsciously. So noticing when there's a shift in your body or a shift in your inner monologue is major. And when you do notice it, you want to label it. This is my nervous system trying to keep me safe. What awareness does is it creates space. It separates you from the thoughts and the feelings that you're having so that you can become the observer and you can move out of reactivity and back into agency. Because when we're in a reactive survival mode, we are no longer in our agency. We can't make an intentional choice because we are literally trying to survive. And when you're trying to survive, you don't have time to think like that. You are reacting to the environment and the situation. So we take back our power by recognizing what's going on, naming it, and that creates the space to move forward a little bit more intentional. This is how you take down the inner critic brick by brick. This begs the question, how do I go ahead and rewrite the inner critic? How do I make it so that I'm not triggered into fear in the first place? And to do this, we're going to replace the negative limiting beliefs with affirmations of what's possible. We're replacing the limiting with the expansive. I'll demonstrate this with an example. Recently, I was feeling really bad. I was feeling really shameful. And this is about my kid. I have a 2.5-year-old, and he was biting at daycare yesterday. And I felt a lot of shame around that. And I just could not shake this. I could not shake the shame. And I eventually realized, okay, number one, I'm feeling like shit because I feel shameful about my son's behavior. I feel like a bad mom and a bad parent. And I'm replaying in my head all of the ways in which I feel like I'm a bad parent. So I recognized that that belief was at the root of my fear, right? My fear that my kid, I'm failing him somehow. So the task there, once you have the awareness and once you've regulated, is to actively combat and replace that statement, that belief, whatever it is, with something that's not self-critical. So I'm doing the best I can. Biting is a developmentally regular and appropriate behavior. I don't like it, but it doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. In fact, I'm a great parent because I care. I'm doing everything I can do to ensure my son grows up as a kind, loving person. He's not a bad kid. I'm not a bad mom. And I want to be clear that this is not fluff. This is not bullshit. This is neurological rewiring. This is you installing a new emotional code. I want you to remember, you are not your inner critic. You're the consciousness hearing it. And you always have the power to shift into your power and rewrite the narrative of your story. Your inner critic may have kept your ancestors alive, but you're here to thrive. So the next time it pipes up, I want you to remember this is not the voice of truth. It's just your brain running ancient software. And you are the upgrade. If you loved this episode, I hope you'll share it with someone who's ready to reclaim their focus and reclaim their story. Until next time, be kind to your mind, rewrite your story, and keep living like the main character you already are. Love you. Bye.